About 2.5 years ago, in my former life as a campus minister at Clemson University, I traveled to Nicaragua on a mission trip with my intern Karen and 11 of our students from Clemson. We were hosted by CEPAD, which is a consortium of Presbyterian denominations in Nicaragua that have been working together for almost 40 years to serve God by serving the people of Nicaragua. While we were there, we spent several days out in the small village of Malacatoya. Now, Malacatoya is a farming village located about 3 hours' drive northeast of the capital city of Managua, up in the mountains. I know you've probably been there, you know what I'm talking about. The village consists of small farms scattered along the side of a narrow gravel road, each with a small home, usually constructed of cinder block, with no indoor plumbing and few of the amenities that we would come to expect from American homes. Meals were cooked over open fires, and toilet facilities were outhouses out back, and showers consisted of a cistern of water and a bucket. I stayed with 2 of my students in the home of Dom Orlando, one of the leaders of the community and the operator of the local store, as well as a farmer of passion fruit and coffee. Orlando's home was deemed suitable to host a group of American college students and their minister because it featured the luxury of a concrete floor. Dom Orlando's family was warm, and they welcomed us into their home, offering us cots in the front room, which also doubled as the store I mentioned earlier. And it gave me the unique experience of sleeping next to a table full of machetes. The room was lit by a single incandescent bulb in the ceiling, and they had a small black and white television that was adorned with a set of rabbit ears. The walls, though, were covered with photographs of their children and their children's family, and Dom Orlando was more than proud to tell us all about them. While we were there, we worked on a soil conservation project building erosion breaks in the local farmers' fields, most of which were located along the steep slopes of hills. Remember, they were up in the mountains. But while we worked, agents from CEPAD, representatives of the church, held seminars in those same fields teaching the local farmers how to test the sand and clay content of their soil and advising them about what crops might grow well on their soil and how to increase the yield of those crops that they were already growing. One of the farmers on whose land we were working had been growing coffee with only moderate success for many years. Why coffee? Well, because that's what his family had always grown. That's what he knew. But Joel, one of our friends with CEPAD, tested his soil and found that it really probably wasn't very good for coffee, but what it was good for was banana trees. They would do much better. Now, these were missionaries of the church in Nicaragua, but you could be forgiven for mistaking them for agents of the Ohio State University Extension Service. You see, there, the church sees its mission as not just preaching and teaching and administering the sacraments and providing pastoral care, although they certainly do those things. In Nicaragua, the churches also see as their mission to help the people to provide for their families and to meet the needs of their children. On our last day in Malacatoya, the director of CEPAD in that region spoke to us, and through a translator, he told us, Jesus said in the Gospel of John, I came that you might have life and have it abundantly. When our bellies are full, he said, we experience that abundant life. Now, I've been thinking a lot about that this week, about abundant life and what it means to enjoy abundance, and about our own abundance, and about the fine line between abundance and greed and whether we're on the right side of it. In the passage that we read today, Jesus warns against greed and cautions that life does not consist in the abundance of possessions. To make his point, Jesus tells the story of a certain man whose land produced abundantly, so much so that his barns were overwhelmed, and he began to make plans to build bigger barns to hold all that the fields had produced. And he was so excited about this harvest that when the barns are completed, he plans to just relax and eat, drink, and be merry. And while I know this is supposed to be a warning against greed, my first impression is that this man actually sounds like a wise man. Wise because he is aware that just because the fields produced this year doesn't mean that they will also produce next year. Wise because he does not treat his newfound abundance, as my father used to say, like it was burning a hole in his pocket. Wise because he saved for the future. How many times have we heard it said, a penny saved is a penny earned, waste not, want not? Members of the generation that survived the Great Depression, like my grandparents, learned to save everything and found great wisdom in being frugal. You see, you saved because you had to, because there might not be more coming later. As a child, I watched my mother reuse butter dishes to save leftovers. That's two frugal acts of saving right there. One, when you cook something, you eat it until it's gone. Leftovers all week. And two, since the dish comes free with the butter, you might as well use it again. It works just as well as Tupperware, and it costs a whole lot less. I've been taught since I can remember that saving is wise. But there's also a biblical precedent for saving during times of great abundance. In Genesis 41, Joseph interprets Pharaoh's dreams about 7 fat cows and 7 thin cows and 7 fat ears of grain and 7 thin ones. You may remember this even if you haven't read that story from Genesis. If you've ever seen Joseph in the amazing Technicolor Dreamcoat, it's that story. Joseph says the dreams mean that there will be 7 years of plenty, followed by 7 years of famine in the land. And he advises Pharaoh to store up grain in barns during the plentiful years so that there will be plenty during the lean years. And it's because of this that Pharaoh appoints Joseph to be his chief deputy and says of Joseph, "There is no one as discerning and wise as you." Yet when God speaks to the man in this parable, who also builds barns and saves just like Joseph did, God calls him not wise, but a fool. Why do you think that is? Well, first, the man speaks only of my crops, my grain, my goods, and my soul, which demonstrates that he does not recognize God as the source of the abundance that he enjoys. Secondly, God's question, "The things you have prepared, whose will they be?" draws us back to the fact that this man has given no consideration to the needs of the people around him. Even though he has filled his barns with plenty left over, in other words, his wildest expectations for this harvest may have been far exceeded, he still has no thought of using his overwhelming excess to help someone else who may not have been so richly blessed. Jewish law addresses how one is supposed to respond after the harvest. Deuteronomy 14 says that when the harvest is brought in, a tithe is given to God, which is consumed in a feast that is shared with the widows and the orphans and the aliens in their land and any others who may not have had access to such abundance of their own. New Testament scholar Audrey West notes, throughout Luke's gospel, as well as in the development of the church over the centuries, the act of giving to the poor remains a central act of the sanctified life. The man in the parable, she writes, is so self-centered, however, that he cannot see beyond what he considers to be his harvest, his barns, and his own life. All that he has stored up for himself will not bring him life, for his life is demanded of him that night. But the implication is that had he shared it with others, the great harvest could have brought life to others. What looks at first like wisdom is actually foolishness. And I am reminded of Jesus' words earlier in Luke, "What does it profit them if they gain the whole world but lose or forfeit themselves?" The troubling thing about this parable, though, may very well be that many of us, put in the same position as the man God calls a fool, would probably have done the same thing. The wise thing to do, it seems, would be to hunker down and save as much as possible. But here, Jesus seems to suggest that the faithful thing to do is to share God's abundance with others so that others may have abundant life as well. Which points us to what this parable is really about: faith and the foolish man's lack of it. If we read on in Luke's gospel just a bit, we will understand this parable even more. Jesus said to his disciples, "Therefore I tell you, do not worry about your life, what you will eat, or about your body, what you will wear. For life is more than food, and the body more than clothing. Consider the ravens. They neither sow nor reap. They have neither storehouse nor barn, and yet God feeds them. Of how much more value are you than the birds? And can any of you, by worrying, add a single hour to your span of life? If then you are not able to do so small a thing as that, why do you worry about the rest? Consider the lilies, how they grow. They neither toil nor spin, yet I tell you, even Solomon in all his glory was not clothed like one of these. But if God so clothes the grass of the field, which is alive today and tomorrow is thrown into the oven, how much more will he clothe you, you of little faith? And do not keep striving for what you are to eat and what you are to drink, and do not keep worrying, for it is the nations of the world that strive after all these things, and your Father knows that you need them. Instead, strive for his kingdom, and these things will be given to you as well. See, Jesus reminds his hearers that God will provide, and that worry about food and shelter and clothing and the other things should not be what drives them day to day. Rather, they should strive after the kingdom of God and trust in God's providence. Now, for any sensible person, this has to sound frightening or crazy or both. It is not rational to expect to just go about our daily lives and pay no heed whatsoever to our daily needs, expecting them to be met by divine intervention. No, we have come to believe that God provides through the normal systems of human life, through using our talents to perform necessary jobs, to earn paychecks, to provide for our needs. It is like the old preacher's story of the man who finds himself trapped atop the roof of his house during a sudden and raging flood. He prays to God to save him from the waters. 3 different times boats arrive with people offering him assistance, but 3 times he sends them away saying, I have faith and I am waiting for God to save me. When the rising waters finally sweep the man to his death, he finds himself standing at the pearly gates before St. Peter, so he demands to know why his faith was not rewarded. Why did God not save him? Well, says St. Peter, we sent 3 boats, but you kept sending them away. We sent 3 boats, but you kept sending them away. Okay. You got to work with me, people. In our Reformed tradition, we affirm that God usually moves in and through the created order to bring about God's will. And biblical examples to the contrary, dramatic divine intervention is actually pretty rare. So the upshot is we do not give away our paychecks and expect God to provide something else for us to eat and a place to live. God already did. You see, that's what the paycheck was for. But what Jesus does emphasize is that our lives should not be dictated by worry over necessities, that our lives should be characterized by a concerted effort to live into the kingdom of God and to trust that God, who calls us to share God's gracious bounty with those who are in need. In his commentary on the gospel according to Luke, R. Allen Culpepper notes that the rich fool may protest that he has always believed in God, but when it comes to managing his life, dealing with possessions and planning for the future, he lives as though there were no God. The parable, therefore, probes our basic commitments. What difference should our faith in God make in the practical matters of life? And that really gets to the heart of the matter. We can say that we trust in God all we want, but how we live will show the extent of our faith. Of course, we have to be careful, because it would be easy to misunderstand what's being called for here. Jesus is not calling us to a sort of self-imposed poverty that gives everything away and which places unrealistic expectations on God's willingness and ability to provide. But neither is Jesus calling us to a token charity that shares only what is safe and trusts in God's provision not at all. There's a sweet spot somewhere in between, a place where we give more than what is safe to help those who have so very little. But at the same time, we provide for our families and meet their needs as well. It's a place where we share not just a pittance of what is left over, but where we make pledges and commitments that stretch us and that force us to trust in the goodness of God who provides. And make no mistake, God has provided for us abundantly. We may not feel very wealthy, but by the world's standards, we certainly are. According to a report issued by the World Bank in 2008, at least 80%, that's 8 out of every 10 people on the planet, lives on just $10 a day or less. And almost half the world, 3 billion people, live on just about $2.50 a day or less. When I was in the 7th grade, one of my friends told me that I was rich, which was a shock to me, but he told me I was rich because my mother didn't have to work. I didn't feel rich, but by his standard, I was. I don't feel wealthy now, but I have no doubt that God has given me more than I need and is probably disappointed that I haven't shared more of it. When I read the words of the 23rd Psalm that we read this morning, I hear there a profound statement of faith in God who not only provides for our needs, but provides for them abundantly. I hear the words, I shall not want. You prepare a table before me. My cup overflows. But the last line speaks to God's intensity in the providing. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I shall dwell in the house of the Lord my whole life long. In the original Hebrew in which the Psalms were written, the word follow that's used there is the same word that's used elsewhere to describe the pursuit of a hawk for its prey. So a better reading of that last line might very well be, surely God's goodness and mercy shall relentlessly pursue me, like a hawk chases its prey, never giving up, never letting go. That reading is much more intense, but it also speaks much more clearly about God intentionally blessing us. And if God is that intense and intentional about showing us goodness and mercy, how intense and intentional does that mean we need to be in showing goodness and mercy to one another? It means we need to be intense about making sure the hungry are fed and the homeless have shelter. It means we need to be serious about sharing the gospel in word and deed, about making sure that young people have Sunday school classes and youth group in which to learn about and experience God's love, and adults to lead them. It means we need to be intentional about making sure the sick and the homebound are visited and not forgotten, about making sure justice is done for the weak and that kindness is shown to the least of these. It means not building up barns but breaking down barriers, not storing up for ourselves all that we've earned, but being generous toward God and sharing that with which God has so richly blessed us. And while I know this congregation is generous and always has been, we can do more. We have to do more. What if we committed to give back to God more than what is comfortable, more than what is safe? What if we sat down each month, we paid the mortgage, we paid the utilities and the credit cards, and figured out what would be a fair and safe amount to give to God, and then added 10%? Or half again as much, or even doubled that amount? What if we pushed ourselves beyond what is comfortable and safe and made a stronger effort to be rich toward God? How much more might the kingdom of God be visible? That's my hope for each of us this day, that we would carry with us the words of the psalmist, surely goodness and mercy shall relentlessly pursue me all the days of my life, and that we would live like we believe them, and that we would have the courage to share that goodness and mercy just as relentlessly with the world around us, setting aside fear of want, fear of scarcity, being rich toward God. I will leave you with one last story of one who was being rich towards God. See, there was an old man who lived in a rundown tenement across the street from a group of college students. His eyes were half blind from cataracts, and he could often be seen shuffling along in 2 mismatched left shoes, attending to his errands for the day. His name was Mr. Roth, and sometimes he would stop by the student's home across the street, offering to share the vegetables that he grew in his backyard. As the visits became more frequent, they would sit and talk and listen to Mr. Roth's stories and enjoy the tune of his harmonica. And after a time, the young men decided to do something to help the poor old man. So they went out one day to collect shoes and clothes and a few necessities that they left anonymously outside his door. The next day, Mr. Roth stopped by the student's house and reported, the Lord is so good. I came out of my house this morning and found a bag full of shoes and clothing on my front porch. Well, that's wonderful, Mr. Roth, the boys said. We're happy for you. You know what's even more wonderful? Mr. Roth asked them. Just yesterday, I met some people that could really use them. See, being rich towards God is facing the fear of not having enough and sharing what we have anyway. Now, there are those who would say that that's just foolish. But I believe that God would say that's wise. And to God be all glory, honor, power, and dominion in this world and in the world that is to come.